One of the people we met in Oslo was one of the principal architects for Snøhetta, who designed the new Norwegian opera house, which is what this is. And actually that's him, the tall fellow standing there in front. He agreed to sort of give us a tour of the opera house the next day. And we actually didn't go into the interior spaces because we hadn't booked to do that ahead of time, but he gave us a great tour of the outside spaces and the public spaces, which is really what we were interested in. Ketil Thorsen is his name. We were interested in public space. We were interested in outdoor public space and how that worked. The quote that really stuck with us that he gave us was that outdoor public space needs to be generous, magnetic, and transformative. And I think that resonated with all of us. His point was, and actually, you know, with the whole arena design thing happening, I think this is something to keep in mind as well, that this was a public building. I mean, this was not a cheap building. I mean, that's all marble we're walking on there. But his point was that if it was a public building, publicly constructed, that it had to be there for the public, and you shouldn't have to buy a ticket in order to be able to enjoy it and to use it. So this building is as much about the active use of the public space outside of the area where you buy your tickets as it is. We didn't even get into the bit which is the actual opera house, which I'm sure is stunning in a different kind of way. But the public space of this building, which is always active and always available, was a major focus of the building. And the whole roof, this was a Sunday, and people were just out walking. It was not a particularly warm day. It wasn't a really cold day. It was probably -10, -12, somewhere down there. In the summertime, obviously, I mean, it acts a little bit differently. You can get right, it slopes right down into the water. But I think what we were really amazed by was just how many people were just out walking on a Sunday in this space. And, you know, because there was nothing, it was just a space to walk in is what it was. But it had gathered that public imagination. One of the things you see everywhere, particularly in Oslo, was people just carry their cross-country skis with them everywhere. It's just a given. This was a park, and so there's no particular ski trails there. She just walked through the gates of the park, put down her skis, and off she went. There are more lit cross-country ski trails in Oslo than we have cross-country ski trails, period. It really just is everywhere, and people are carrying their skis everywhere. It has always been thus. I suspect it always will be thus, but the facilities are also there to help it happen. People are very, very active on the outside. And I think that's one of the things we do really need to remember, that when you're talking about winter, I think one of the things that really struck me is it really is about active activity. Passive activity becomes much harder to do in wintertime outdoors, but active activity, if you make it possible, if you make it available for people to do it and for it to happen, is really, really possible. I'm going to let Rob talk about the next one a little bit because it was one of his faves. Do you remember?
This was actually in Oslo, and it was actually an incredible setting. This was actually during the Nordic Games, and this was actually a small commercial village that was set up. A very interesting model in terms of bringing people into these open spaces, into these kind of winter markets, into Christmas markets. So they actually bring in these individual buildings. They're unheated, but they do have power to them. The fronts of them open up, they put lights on them at night, and it just actually becomes an incredible place in the evenings when they open up these markets, or even sometimes on the weekends during the days. But it's kind of one of those models that we really should be looking at and exploring. It is used elsewhere, and it works very, very well in this kind of an environment. You don't need to have it just be warm outside to make these little marketplaces work.
These actually were not permanent. They weren't there all the time. I mean, the Nordic Games were huge, and we were there 2 days before they started, and they were just setting up for them. But there's no reason why you couldn't do something like this on a regular basis, and they do in other places.
The whole park was set up as a sculpture court, but it became a place people went to in winter to look at the sculptures. It was a bright sunny day when we were there, and there probably were several hundred people climbing over and around all these sculpture courts. And this is Vigeland, actually, some of his work. And this is one of the smaller examples, but in other parts of the park, there was masses of these pieces put together, and people just naturally moved around them, and it was winter, they were still climbing on them. Nothing seemed to stop them. They just had an attitude about wanting to enjoy the space and enjoy the sculpture.
What's interesting about this is more ironic than anything else. This is basically inside that little storefront, and they have a kind of refrigerated room in there. And they take you in, and they put you in the coats. The ice all comes from the ice hotel, the same place where they do the ice hotel in Sweden. And actually, this is run by the same people who do the ice hotel. I think the interesting part of this story is we were the only people there that night, and bless their hearts, they were game troopers to entertain us. The really big business that this does is with the cruise ships in the summertime. And they're lined up around the block to get into this because people want to have that winter, that Oslo, that northern experience. So, we could certainly do this here. I think what's most interesting about this is about the marketing of winter and marketing the winter experience to people that are really interested in it. This is the other picture from the park, and I've used this one. Actually, I gave this to our transportation people with LRT because there's all this worry about whether the LRT will work in wintertime, how it will fit into our neighborhoods. I mean, you can see this is literally right across the street. I turned around, took the picture of the woman skiing, took the picture of the people, and took the picture of the LRT. That's that space, and then the sculpture park is further on. That's very similar to the system that will be. That could be Stony Plain Road in hopefully not too long from now. And people ask about winter. They ask about how it fits into community. So that's I just turned another 30 degrees, and there was a family coming across the street. That train is right there. It's partly an example of the fact that winter just ain't an issue for this kind of technology, but I also wanted to take it to show that it was a great example of what we've been talking about, that if you do this right, it actually augments the community. It doesn't fracture it, it doesn't split it, it doesn't do any of those kind of things. These are the steps up to the cathedral in a major square in Helsinki, and you can sort of get up the edge a little bit if you really try, but they just don't clear them. And this is, the public, we went up there, everybody was going up there, it was the only way into the building. And that's why I'm saying some of the risk tolerance is a little bit different, I think, in part. But clearly they don't have as many lawyers as we have. No. They started about 4 years ago in Helsinki doing a light design competition and event. And basically what they've done is they picked 2 or 3 top designers. It's competitive now. So every year this is different. And people wander through the city between the different installations, and they're basically lighting installations. One of the interesting things actually that got pointed out to us when we went up to Rovaniemi further north is they actually split their winter into different seasons in their minds. They have dark winter, which is what we've just gone through, and then they have cold winter, which is what we're just starting right now. And I think that was illuminating for us, because I think we do as well but hadn't realized it. If you think of all the light that we do at Christmas time, in some ways we have dealt with dark winter in this city fairly successfully, the kind of illumination we do. It's cold winter that we're still struggling with. It's the stuff that happens right now and how we animate that. This was looking out of the Baltic. The Baltic freezes and becomes, again, an instant park. And this was not a warm day. I think it was about -18. Yeah, and people just, it was another Sunday, and people just go, I mean, there were hundreds of people just out walking on the Baltic, and you walk out onto the Baltic and you walk back again. There's nowhere to go. You can't get Sweden. That would be like 3 days walk away. So you just walk out and you walk back, and then this is sitting on the shore. It has this sail on it, and it completely captures the sunlight. It completely sheltered from the wind. There is an indoor area to it. You go in there and you get your food, but nobody was sitting in there because everybody wanted the sunlight.
I was amazed at the high fashion that was showing. I mean, these people walking by and these women actually looked fabulous in their winter clothes, something that I don't think we do a good job of either. Well,
because we're not going outside, so yeah. Where would you show off your winter clothes? I think there's a really, really important lesson here to understand design, because it was not cold in this space. It was -18, and we're not even wearing hats, and that blanket's just for show. This was a warm space. So, and that had everything to do with design and nothing to do with the temperature. Some of this stuff is new there too, right? So that the kind of little sitting areas outside of cafes and things in Oslo in particular, and we also saw it in other places, happened as a result of the no smoking rules, the same way it did here. But what happened, interesting, is because you can take your drink outside, because you don't have to walk 300 meters away from the front door, because the bar has put down a little place to sit. People started sitting out there, and then it wasn't just the smokers were sitting out there anymore, everybody was sitting out there. So some of it is the accident of the non-smoking rules and the fact that they played out differently there. I'm not necessarily suggesting we would change our rules here. Clearly we don't have the ability to make it legal for people to drink outside, that's the province, but that's part of why it's happening there in a way that it hasn't happened here. This is a soccer pitch, which they were clearing so that the kids could play on it all winter. This is just a kind of example of, that it's always frustrated me that we spend, for instance, out here so much time clearing the snow out of the square when we could be piling it up and making a slide out of it and letting people use it. This is the Arctic Circle. probably one of the most commercial places I've ever been. It's Rovaniemi. Rovaniemi is a town of 30,000 people with an international airport. Flights come in regularly from Southern Europe, from Asia, because people want the winter experience, and that's what they're selling. So this is Santa's Village. Now, obviously, their Arctic Circle is a bit different from ours. This is Santa's Village. Santa lives here 365 days a year. You can visit him, 366 in leap years. And everything else is shops. But they're also in the town doing things like snowmobile safaris, they call them, or reindeer safaris, where you go out and have the winter experience out on the land. So, and they have built their entire economy in this town of 30,000 people on the whole winter tourism thing. Nobody can ever tell me that it's too cold or we're too northern to do bike riding in wintertime. And I will tell you, this was everywhere. So the argument, and you know, people had always said, oh, no, in Europe it is different. People are biking everywhere there. This was at the Arctic Circle. And it was not uncommon. We met with someone, actually the architect we met with in Oulu, which is a little bit further south, but not a lot, said their rule is that their bike lanes have to be cleared at 7 o'clock every morning if it snows. And they do it for a reason, and this was the experience that I had last winter biking, was that I biked until the first day that we had snow and it was hard for me to deal with, and I was biking around downtown and I didn't feel safe. And I put my bike away. I didn't get it back out again. And then I went on this trip and I got my bike back out again and I was fine. But their point is that one day where people try to bike in and it is not a good experience, they will put their bike away for the winter and never take it back out again. This is Kemi, which is another, not a big city. They do a big snow castle, I think they call it. It's big business for them. It's big tourism business for them. They put a lot of money into the marketing of it, but this part of it makes its money back. And they also have an icebreaker that they got, that they take people out and you can jump in the ocean in adventure suits. And that's what they're marketing. That's what they're selling, and people come from all over to do it. This is sort of an area like, I guess, a little bit like Rice Hard Way. And they have made an effort in the last, they've just started doing this to make it into a kind of public space. So they have built little slides and things. Again, the people are using them, but there's no programming around it. It just is a kind of winter park that they built on their main street. This is actually Alvar Aalto, who's the most famous Finnish architect. His stuff was everywhere. He's revered as a god. Everywhere we went, we were showed his buildings. But this is one of his early ones, and it was a grain elevator, and they have preserved it. They're not quite sure what to do with it, because what do you do with an old grain elevator? But one of the things that they did with this, interestingly enough, is it was in a fairly troubled neighborhood of town, and they've started doing programming with the community around snow in wintertime, letting them do sculptures, working with the kids, all framed around this grain elevator. So they'd done it one year, and they call it snow therapy, I think was the word they used for it. So there's a whole other program that it's about social support and getting into communities and supporting kids and using snow and the ability to do that.